Now it's my joy and uh, honor, privilege. I'm grateful to be able to facilitate today and welcome John Bell. John Bell has been a friend of mine for, I guessed about since you came to Plum Village for the LAMP transmission. I think that might have been 2010, something like that, or in that range, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there. And I was a monastic there and met John there. And John has been someone that's supported my practice as a monastic. And I know he supported, I don't know, I want to say hundreds, maybe it's thousands of people in their practice, not just in the Sangha, but in his work as an organizer, youth build, working with young people, his career, international movement with 350 programs for supporting young people to get employment who had obstacles to that. I think at one point you lived in New York City in Times Square, was it? Somewhere. No, not in Times, but in New York City doing, maybe it was Harlem. I don't know. I'm just making up stories now. But lived in New York City supporting, I think, some of that work. He's a Dharma teacher in our order and has been facilitating a Sangha since 1997, Mountain Bell Sangha. He is also one of the, I think, I would say, founding member of this community, the Earth Holder community, and the Earth Holder CTC, which started meeting in like 2014, something like that. He's been arrested a couple times for activism, protesting, which makes me very happy. Something I relate to him. He has a deep connection to Dr. King and racial healing. It's been a big part of his work. I know I've had the chance to work with John a few times. It's always a joy. He's just written a book. I hope you'll get it. It's called Unbroken Wholeness. I haven't read it yet. It's on my list. He's also just started a movement in the Sangha called the Beloved Community Circles, which is engaged practice for our Sanghas. And he may say more about that. I'll put links to some of this stuff, some of the links to him and his dana for him, as well as his website, and a link to the book and Beloved Community Circles. I think it's enough from me. John, great joy and honor to have you here. Wholehearted welcome, and I will hand it over to you and spotlight
you. Dear Ty, dear community, it's good to see friends that I've known for a long time. Thank you, Aaron, for that nice introduction. It wasn't Times Square, it was uptown in central Harlem where I lived. Much different. Good to be with you. Glad to meet new people. I think we have people from other countries outside the United States, so welcome to you. I'd like to start with a guided meditation. It's a poem actually by Joy Harjo, who is the first Indigenous American U.S. Poet Laureate in 2019. So if you'd like to close your eyes, find a comfortable position. Ty has been very good reminding us that meditation should not be torture. So we want to find a position where our body is not distracted. And so I'll read the poem and then we'll have some silence after that. Body, speech, and mind in perfect oneness. We send our hearts along with the sound of this bell. May the hearers, including ourselves, awaken from forgetfulness and transcend all anxiety and sorrow. for calling the spirit back from wandering the earth in its human feet by Joy Harjo. Put down that bag of potato chips, that white bread, that bottle of pop. Turn off that cell phone, computer, and remote control. Open the door, then close it behind you. Take a breath offered by friendly winds. They travel the earth, gathering the essence of plants to clean. Give it back with gratitude. If you sing, it will give you your spirit lift to fly to the stars, ears, and back. Acknowledge this earth who has cared for you since you were a dream, planting itself precisely within your parents' desire. Let your moccasin feet take you to the encampment of the guardians who have known you before time, who will be there after time. They sit before the fire that has been there without time. Let the earth stabilize your post-colonial insecure jitters. Be respectful of the small insects, birds, and animal people who accompany you. Ask their forgiveness for the harm we humans have brought down upon them. Don't worry. The heart knows the way, though there may be high rises, interstates, checkpoints, armed soldiers, massacres, wars, and those who will despise you because they despise themselves. The journey may take you a few hours, a day, a year, a few years, 100 or 1,000 or even more. Watch your mind. Without training it, it might run away and leave your heart for the immense human feast set by the thieves of time. Do not hold regret. When you find your way to the circle, to the fire kept burning by the keepers of your soul, you will be welcomed. You must clean yourself with cedar, sage, and other healing plant. Cut the ties you have to failure and shame. Let go the pain you are holding in your mind, your shoulders, your heart, all the way to your feet. Let go the path of your ancestors and make way for those who are heading in our direction. And ask forgiveness. Call upon the help of those who you love. These helpers take many forms: animal, element, bird, angel, saint, stone, or ancestor. Call your spirit back. It may be caught in corners and creases of shame, judgment, and human abuse. You must call in a way that your spirit will want to return. Speak to it as you would to a beloved child. Welcome your spirit back from its wandering. It may return in pieces, in tatters. Gather them together. They will be happy to be found after being lost for so long. Your spirit will need to sleep a while after it is bathed and given clean clothes. Now you can have a party. Invite everyone you know who loves and supports you. And keep room for those who have no place else to go. Make a giveaway. And remember, keep the speeches short. Then you must do this. Help the next person, 'find their way through the dark. Just be in silence for a while. But dear friends, dear Thai, dear Earth Holder community, I am here to talk about unbroken wholeness, and that poem for me talks about the brokenness and the wholeness. I have to I'm going to talk about that topic, but I want to set the stage a little bit personally. Ever since I was a boy, growing up in a small working class shipyard town near Seattle, Bremerton, Washington, I've experienced jaw-dropping beauty of the Pacific Northwest and human kindness overflowing, right alongside with human cruelty and war and racism and environmental damage. And it never made sense to me why all this, what seemed to be unnecessary suffering. And I think I, at an early age, for some reason, have been on a mission ever since then to try to help heal and integrate a broken world. I'm not alone in this. I'm sure many of you have made that. I couldn't stop my father from drinking or what made him drink. I couldn't stop the neighbors from beating their children. I couldn't stop the the boys in the neighborhood from pulling the legs off insects and squishing ladybugs. And I just felt violated, but I couldn't stop because I was too small, too powerless. And somewhere around age 13, I remember making some kind of promise to God. It was very close to Jesus, raised Catholic, where of course everything was sin. I made some kind of promise to help fix the world. That was my words then, for people, to help my people like my father and the other neighbor fathers mainly, who were all drunks, hardworking people who drank. And so I got involved in the 60s. I was involved in the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, arrested many times during that period as part of civil disobedience. I taught in freedom schools in Harlem and East Harlem, lived in Harlem for 18 years as a white person because it was sort of considered right to be part of the community you taught in. I was a founding member of an organization called Children of War, where we brought young people from 18 different war zones all around the world to talk about their experiences of what it's like to grow up in a war zone. It was my first experience to Israeli and Palestinian young people. we put them in the same group deliberately, and they considered each other, enemies at first, and wound up hearing each other's stories, and wound up going back to Israel with making joint Palestinian and Israeli youth peace groups. I learned a lot about the oppression worldwide. I've been taught by people of color, challenged by people of color, scraped off some, not all, of my inherited, unwanted but inherited white racism, white supremacy thinking. And I feel very grateful for the life I've lived. And along the way, I found a peer counseling network that helped with the emotional healing stuff, and Thich Nhat Hanh practice through a circuitous route through Gandhi, and then Hinduism, and then other Buddhist teachers, and finally met Thai in 1982. And as Aaron mentioned, I've been kind of active in the Plum Village community for a long time because of its engaged practice. So now we look around in the modern day today, and we can see suffering is deepening. Things are not holding, the center is cracking. And knowing that, I think it breaks my heart, probably breaks your heart, and we want to do something. So I've done a lot of things, and yet still there's more, it seems to me. So a little backstory on this book. Here's a copy of it. You've probably seen it around. Unbroken Wholeness, 6 Pathways to the Beloved Community, Integrating Social Justice, Emotional Healing, and Spiritual Practice. So a little bit about how this book came about, because I think there's a story in that. I've always loved to write. I love to write. It helps me clarify my thinking. Some of the things, so I have hundreds of articles in my hard drive, most of which haven't seen the light of day. But some of them are pretty good and useful. And I thought, well, maybe these can be useful. So in 2019, the winter, December, I put together these articles in some categories like climate change stuff and racial justice oppression stuff and youth work stuff and people that I've met that I had interesting encounters with and practices that I developed. And I thought, well, maybe these can be useful. I'll just publish it myself. And I was having a mentoring meeting. I was having a meeting with Joe Confino, who some of you may know. He's the co-host of the podcast The Way Out is In. And if you haven't checked that out, I really, really recommend it. It's wonderful. But I was Joe's mentor in his process to become an OI member. And he was still living in New York at the time, working at the Huffington Post. And we met in Queens when I was down from Boston, where I lived, to New York City to visit my daughter and her family, and visit my 6-7-year-old grandson then. So we were having coffee in this coffee shop, and I said to Joe at the end of our mentoring meeting, I have this idea for a book. I even have a title for it, like a bunch of stuff I've written. And the title is Unbroken Wholeness. And that is comes from my touchstone quote that I read decades ago from the quantum physicist David Bohm, who was a Buddhist and a friend of Krishnamurti, and he wrote a book called The Implicate Order, in which he described reality with this phrase. He described reality as unbroken wholeness in flowing movement. Unbroken wholeness in flowing movement. And I felt like that was such an apt and succinct description of reality. And I've used that a lot. And the unbroken wholeness part reminds me that we can't be separate. We're not part. We're integrated in with everything. And that's very reassuring. The flowing movement part was a little more challenging because, I'd like things to be steady and set, and I'd like to keep things the way they are, and at least the good things, and of course, impermanent rules. So, but learning how to surf the changing reality of unbroken wholeness. So Joe says, well, why don't we have Parallax Press publish? Well, I'd forgotten that he was on the board of Parallax Press. So he called up Isai, the publisher, and said, Isai, he answered the phone, because the board members call him, of course, you answer the phone. And he said, we got this great author and Dharma Teacher, John Bell, it's good, so let's publish his book. So what's she going to say? Her boss had said, let's publish a book. So she said, okay, send me a manuscript. So I sent her this manuscript in March, and they couldn't get to it for 6 months. I finally got an editor. It took a few more months, and editor wrote back and said, good stuff, good writing, interesting stuff, but it needs an arc. It needs a story. It needs more of you. People want to know you. By this time, I was doing this project called Beloved Community Circles, which I can say more about later. And I said, I don't want to do that. That's all these writings are about the past. I'm really just want, if they were useful, fine. I don't want to have to spend a lot of time trying to become an author. They said, well, you're a first-time author. I said, I'm not here to become a famous author. I'm near the end of my life. I want to do something more, forward-looking. So I said no. But then I read over that winter, the winter of December, January 2020, I read Brothers in the Beloved Community, the friendship of Martin Luther King and Thich Nhat Hanh, by Bishop Mark Andrus, who was then the Episcopal Bishop of California. And he told the history of the term beloved community. We all think of it as Dr. King's term, but Dr. King didn't invent the term. He learned it. And the origin of the term itself, not the concept, because the concept of a beloved community, which is, to live, not very rocket science, to live peacefully, harmoniously, fairly, justly, without war and conflict, and in a world where everyone flourishes. But Josiah Royce was a theologian in the early 1900s in the United States. He wrote a book called Future of Christianity in 1913 and used the term beloved community to define that aspiration that's been held deep in the hearts of people. And then I think he was involved with the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And then A.J. Muste came along, who became the director of Fellowship of Reconciliation. He said, we have to add nonviolence to it. And then Howard Thurman came along and became the director of Fellowship of Reconciliation. He said, we have to look at the lens of race, because he was African American, and add community to it. And then Thurman was Dr. King's mentor when King was at Boston College. King liked the idea, and then King introduced it to Thich Nhat Hanh when they met in the mid-60s. Now, Thai had already understood basically what a beloved community is. He had other words for it, but he liked the term. And when King was assassinated, Thai decided to really, he said, I will help manifest the beloved community. And of course, look what he's done. He and all of us together collectively. So, and what they did is these thinkers positioned the beloved community in two dimensions, which I really appreciated. They said, the beloved community is the definition of our inherited relation, our inherent relationship. It already exists in what Thai would call the ultimate dimension of the pure land, where there is no conflict, no discrimination, no suffering in some way. In the Christian world of King and those other, it would be the kingdom of God on earth. It's already manifest. But in the historical reality where we live every day, it's an aspiration. So it's a lot of work to make that happen. So I said, well, since I've been doing these beloved community circles, trying to get practitioners to use the practice to relieve suffering in the wider world in small, intimate settings, I thought, well, maybe I could rewrite these chapters, put an arc to it, make a call for a beloved community circle, a beloved community in itself. And so I did that and added a little bit of biographical information. So, so here's what it is. And first of all, the acknowledgments are pages and pages long, and I had such fun doing it, because this book is not mine. I used a quote to start the acknowledgement. That's a Rumi quote that said, if God said, Rumi, pay homage to everything that's brought me into my arms, there would not be one action, one person, one experience that I would not bow to. And of course, I feel like my book would be like the credits at the end of a movie. Just, how they keep going and going and going and going, scrolling down, they just, all of different people that made up the movie. Well, the people who made this book is like that. So I started with my parents and ancestors and my first teachers and my first girlfriend, because they all taught me something all the way down to now. And so here's what the book is. These 6 pathways, but as I sort of think of them as Indra's net, like a spherical net where each node has a jewel, and the jewel reflects all the other jewels in the net. So it's not really separate. I just write about them as a way to highlight different things. So here are the 6 pathways, and see if these are interesting. You might have other ones, but I think these are at least necessary to create the kind of world we want to live in. One is wise view. It's often cited as the first of the Eightfold Noble Path. For me, it means, what's the story I'm telling myself about who I am and what is the world we're facing, we're looking at, we're involved in? And the view affects a lot of what we think and feel and do. I start the one chapter of the book on wise view, I think, quoting with a story about in 1992 during the bombing of Sarajevo. There was an old cellist who was part of the symphony orchestra of Sarajevo who went out into the rubble in the town square for 22 days in a row and played his cello. And soldier would come out and said, "Why are you playing the cello while they're out here bombing?" And the old cellist said, "Why are they bombing while I'm out here playing my cello?" And I love that story because it really points to, well, what are we paying attention to? Are we, in this case, Sarajevo, are we paying attention to violence or beauty, destruction or uplift? So, in general, is the story we're believing and having been conditioned in and act on, is it that people are selfish and greedy and individualistic, or that we're compassionate, altruistic, and cooperative? Is it that humans are separate from nature and have dominion over nature and therefore can do whatever we want? Or are we kin with everything and we need to regain that kinship so that we're in cooperative balance with the earth? Are we over the tipping point and we're doomed, or is this a chance to wake up to a larger level of consciousness? So in wise view, and Pai has been very good at teaching this, our Buddhist practice, it's just deep in wise view, in my experience. So I try to, whoever I'm with, I think that each human being is amazingly beautiful, miraculous, worthy, innately joyful, naturally cooperative, creative, immensely powerful. And this is true of me, it's true of you. It's true of all the people that I think are my opponents. They are also worthy of respect. They have Buddha nature, Christ nature, whatever that term that helps you understand that. And so to keep their Buddha nature in mind is part of what I try to practice. Difficult at times, because there's a lot that gets my ire up, or my disapproval up, or my disagreement with up. So to treat people with respect, even as I try to stop the harm that I think they're doing, part of wise view. A second node or pathway is to heal our hurts and traumas. Because as long as we're under our habit energies, which it keeps our thinking, we can't think as clearly, we can't love as deeply, we can't act as boldly as we would out from underneath the ways. So you think of our capacity as you come into this world with an immense capacity for everything, and we get dropped into a toxic culture, a particular family, and little by little we can't say this, you can't do that, you can't eat that, you can't be friends with that, you can't think like that, you can't dress like that, and we have to survive, and we get narrower and narrower. It's not just abusive, it's just the parameters set by our caregivers, our family, our culture, our schools. And so we wind up much smaller than our capacity. We all kind of know this, I think. And so to have a process where we heal, and I've found, in addition to mindfulness and compassion practice and kindness, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of emotional work through a peer counseling network called co-counseling, reevaluation counseling. So every day, every week for the last 40 years, I've gotten together with now a close friend, obviously. He comes to my house one week. I go to his house the next week. We exchange 45 minutes each. He doesn't give me advice or try to fix me. He lends me his full, undivided, warm, respectful attention. And in that sacred space, I can do what you can see children do naturally when they get hurt. I cry. I feel a fear. I shake with fear. I let myself be freaking angry and rage at injustice and cruelty and all the things which are violations of right relationships. And that process, emotionally cleansing the kind of glue that holds together my feelings that I'm not big enough, I'm not powerful enough, I can't think, I'm too isolated, all these things which hold me back from playing a bigger role, they get loosened up and healed somewhat. So there's a lot about my healing process and frameworks and things that I've learned in that chapter. The third pathway is transforming racism and oppression. Because the world that we want is not possible as long as we're divided among ourselves. And every kind of ruling group down through history has used different forms of oppression to keep people divided and therefore weaker and unable to mount the kind of strength and force to challenge the systems and the structures which continue to create misery in the world. One of the little things that I say now, for instance, is that the people who are in power now, who themselves are hurting, and they're also very good human beings, but they're caught in this own system. They're very happy to have us arguing about which pronouns to use or whose lives matter more. As important as those are, they're not the main thing. And it keeps us, when we're squabbling among ourselves, it keeps us a little bit divided to really look at the larger picture. So undoing these internalized conditioning around oppression, we've all been born into certain roles in society which we didn't ask for, but comes with a lot of both wonderful things, each identity we have, and also a lot of distress and hurt. And so in that chapter are a lot of, I'm sorry, maybe just trying to keep time. So there are a lot of frameworks, a lot of things I've learned and used over time that I think helped me a lot emerge from my conditioning around oppression. The fourth pathway is, of course, we can't do this alone, so it's forming strong, unbreakable communities. As suffering deepens, we're going to have to need community even more. I was on a series of talks in the last few weeks with about 12 teachers from different Dharma teachers from different Buddhist traditions. One of whom was an African-American woman who said, you know, if the Christian right takes power and becomes dominant, it's foreseeable that they could outlaw other religions, including Buddhism, Judaism, Islam. It could be a real thing. And so she was sounding that alarm, but it's an indication of the way that as suffering deepens and authoritarian deepens and the use of state power deepens, community is going to be increasingly necessary for our sustenance, for licking our wounds, for learning and inspiration, to be cared for, to link arms with, to go for each other, strong circles. And it's a lot of work to do to build a strong community. You know, those of you who have been facilitating sanghas, sometimes it's easy, and then sometimes somebody will show up which has a difficult personality and begins to cause disharmony in the sangha, and then you have to handle it as skillfully as possible. How do you make good decisions? How do you solve conflict? How do you reach harmony? You know, and so there's a lot of skill building I think we need to do. We say we take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and I think the Sangha gets least attention and is probably the most complicated, because guess what? In any group we're in, we bring all our stuff to it, right? All of our good stuff and all of our trouble and problematic stuff. And that influences any group's dynamic. So to learn how to really build strong groups is a piece of doing this. The fifth circle or pathway or node in the network is living ethically every day. Of course, we use the 5 mindfulness trainings. So in this thing, I'd like this book to be available and appeal to folks outside Buddhist community. But I do use our 5 mindfulness. I've included each one, but then in the chapter, I look at how I've applied it, how I've learned from it, different examples of practicing those 5 mindfulness trainings. And then finally, the last circle is, which is not new, it's part of all the other ones, is engaging with others in mindful practice to change things on the things we care about. And people sometimes ask, well, what do I do, John? You know, should I glue myself to Citibank's doors who are investing in fossil fuel infrastructure? Do I go to the State House and advocate for carbon tax? Do I do voter registration and engagement so that I can get good partners in government? Do I run grief circles so we can heal? You know, do I make art so we can sing songs what my response is usually, since interbeing is not just a concept, it's a reality. It doesn't much matter where we start, because everything's connected. It's like you take a piece of fabric and begin to pull it, and it all comes undone because it's woven together. And so my general guideline for myself and others is to say, well, start with what we love, because then we're coming. You don't have to gin up some motivation to do it. It comes out of a natural. Yes, I care about that wetland. Yes, I care about electing, you know, climate-friendly people to office. Yes, I care about doing grief. You know, that's what I like to do, and it feeds you, and it attracts other people with that kind of energy. So there's some things on guidelines and types of ways to decide how to discern what kinds of actions. There's some reflections on the nonviolence as the key principles of nonviolence in the action chapter. Again, all of these intertwined. And then in the action chapter, I'll just say one more piece before we shift into small group discussions. What's emerged for me in the action realm is the beloved community circles. And many of you may have heard about them, but it grew out of Earth Holders, which, as Aaron said, I helped establish beginning about 10 years ago. And it emerged out of Wake Up, where I was a supporter of many Wake Up young leaders. And I started this thing called Mindful Action Pod. Okay, 1 more minute. Excuse me, I gotta turn off my. So the idea of a beloved community circle is to get 5, 10, 4 to 8 local practitioners meeting locally. And people do 3 things together. One is continue to practice so that we're putting our own liberation from suffering at the core, and we do it together. The 2 is to really care about each other in the way that good church communities do or some temple communities do. But if you get sick, I bring you miso soup. Someone in my family dies, you come and hold my hand while I grieve. We get involved in each other's lives, in both the joys and suffering. Care about each other, form really, really strong love relationships. And on the basis of practicing together and caring about each other's well-being, we commit to do X number of days of socially engaged practice out in the world on an issue of our own choosing. And we now have 6 circles up and running in Tampa. Andrew Rock is here from Tampa, in Charlottesville, in Boston, in Mid-Hudson Valley near Blue Cliff, in Minneapolis. Keith is here from the Minneapolis Beloved Community Circle, and in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we're now doing a 6-month training program for 50 people from 12 different countries who've heard about the Beloved Community Circles and they want to do this in addition to their Sangha work, but not wanting to turn the Sangha into a engaged practice center. So, deep in our hearts, we do believe we shall all be free someday, as that iconic civil rights song, "We Shall Overcome," says. And I do think that's true. I hold fast to that. Sometimes the data and the news doesn't seem to point in that direction, but I hold fast that it's possible and that never mind, I won't tell that story. Thank you for listening. Turn it back to Aaron for the next phase.
Thanks so much, John, for your sharing. And yeah, just very grateful. And I think maybe you can all feel the energy of loving kindness and community building coming from John. This is, I think, one of his superpowers I didn't mention in the intro, but such a gift. I'm gonna put some links before we go to the next thing. I just wanted to link some things that John mentioned. There's a link to Unbroken Wholeness, the book, and Beloved Community Circles, and John's website, Begin Within, which is what he's talking about here. And just love this encouragement to start with what we love. It's really resonating with me. But I also, there was a request in the chat, John. I know the name of the poet, Joy Harjo. I don't know the name of the poem.
Yes, it's called "For Calling the Spirit Back from Wandering the Earth in Its Human Feet." Beautiful poem, isn't it? Gee.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm just gonna put this oops, misspelled spirit, but hopefully you can find it through that channel. And our next activity is going into breakout rooms, and